Few games are as consequential as From Software's 2011 breakout hit, Dark Souls. It came out at a time when many major developers were becoming more and more focused on streamlining their games to create smoother experiences for a wider base of players. And while its release didn't halt that trajectory, it did disrupt things enough to prove that there was still a sizable audience for titles that have rough edges, where obscurity and struggle aren't seen as things that need to be fixed, but instead as features. Its success helped carve out a space for so many titles, both indie and AAA, that feature frustration as a central mechanic, and tons of developers have taken inspiration from it in one way or another. Dark Souls' influence continues to ripple across the industry to this day. It has become one of those all-timer titles that will be referenced forever. And its impact obviously isn't just contained to game devs, it's also spread to players. For me personally, it has shaped my tastes and the lens I use to look at games as a whole more than any other title I've played. Even though I thought I knew what I liked about games, playing it unlocked a new appreciation for them, and that first playthrough is something that has stuck with me for 13 years. And this isn't a unique response. It's why there are so many videos where people talk about how Dark Souls changed their life. Honestly, you have a better chance of winning the lottery than of finding a gaming essayist who has never mentioned Dark Souls in a video. The game just hit different, providing a product that harkened back to the oldest of old school games while also feeling entirely fresh. Now, this isn't to say I'd never been challenged by a game before playing Dark Souls. Of course I had, but it wasn't quite to this same level. At that time of life, I was much more likely to quit something if it was giving me that much trouble. So it was rare to ever build up the necessary amount of tension to have the relief of success be all that notable. This made it so sticking with and getting through Dark Souls felt so much more personal. At the start of it, I felt powerless, making every victory, however small it was, feel like something that mattered. And the struggle wasn't exclusive to combat. It also was felt with navigation and trying to parse how various mechanics worked and what the different stats and effects actually did. Every aspect of the game provided some sort of challenge, and there were many times where I thought I would never be able to get past it all. The most prominent example of a moment like this, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of you experienced this same thing, was when I hit Blighttown. By this point of the game, I had strung together a few successes. I'd beaten some bosses, gotten a weapon I felt confident with, and started to figure out what stats would help me out the most. Little did I know, I was making a huge mistake by feeling confident. A feeling that evaporated very quickly. Once I opened the doors to Blighttown, I struggled to make any meaningful progress with the early sections. So I decided that my best bet would be to just make a mad dash through to see if I could spot the next bonfire. And after a few attempts, I was able to. But reaching this bonfire didn't really help at all. Now I was just stuck in the middle of Blighttown and didn't know how to navigate its tangled scaffolding and ladders. I was lost, and the idea of going back from where I came seemed just as daunting and improbable as moving forward. So all I could really do was try to trek through Blighttown, and there is no area in the game that beats you down quite as bad. From the narrow platforms, to the enemies hidden around every corner, to the status effects that can whittle your health down to 0 in just a few seconds, it felt suffocating. And that's not even to mention the frame rate issues, which made all of these things even more deadly. There was a good while where I thought I'd be stuck at that bonfire forever. There was just too much to navigate, too much to fight, too much to overcome. But then there wasn't. I worked my way through slowly and systematically. I did my best to have patience and understand the full layout, and I found a path forward. And it felt incredible. While it's not a straight line, the game takes you from feeling powerless to powerful. And while some of this has to do with getting higher stats and better weapons, more than anything else, it has to do with learning how the world, the enemies, the bosses, the weapons, and the movesets work, and then executing on everything you learned. All of the success from this struggle gets highlighted by the way the game offers a lot of space for reflection. There are so many tense moments, which makes those calm ones, whether it be looking out at a beautiful vista or sitting next to a bonfire, feel so valuable. These breaks give you time to bask in your successes, as well as time to consider your failures and how to overcome them, cementing a connection with what you've done and what you still need to do. In a weird sort of way, this all made me feel vulnerable, which, especially at that point in my life, was an extremely rare thing for me to feel from playing a video game. But man, did I love it. It made me feel so immersed and
created an unshakable bond to the game.
And this feeling is one I have come to covet. I understand that if every game gave it to me, it would stop feeling special, but whenever I try something new, a part of me always hopes it does. As FromSoft has now released a ton of games and plenty of other developers have created titles that fall into a similar vein, you'd think this is a feeling I'd be experiencing a lot. But the reality is that hasn't been the case. Honestly, pretty much nothing FromSoft has put out has come close to making me feel the same way I felt while playing Dark Souls. Like, while I actually did play Demon's Souls before it, I relied far too much on cheese to feel any true sense of accomplishment. As for the rest, they largely just felt like an extension of what Dark Souls established. They're all different in their own ways, the difficulty has certainly ramped up from title to title, but playing Dark Souls gave me the tools to beat everything that came after. I'd probably even argue that most of the games FromSoft has put out since Dark Souls are better, but none of them have clicked with me in that same way. Playing them gave me an echo of what I felt from Dark Souls, and that echo is enough to get me to play FromSoft games until the day I die, but it's not the same. The only exception to this has been Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. I wouldn't say it created the exact same feeling, but it definitely came closer than any other FromSoft game, as its core mechanics were a big enough departure from what Dark Souls had established that I had to unlearn all sorts of habits that weren't applicable to it and master an unfamiliar skill set. It pushed me to the brink again, and while it is still similar enough to Dark Souls to live a bit in its shadow, it did provide something new. The irony of all of this is that the more a game is like Dark Souls, the less likely it is to make me feel the same way I did when playing Dark Souls. A big part of what made it resonate with me so much was that I had never played a game like it before. So while stuff like Ashen and Lies of P, and I'd even argue Hollow Knight, scratch a similar itch in terms of gameplay, for me at least, they didn't have the same kind of profound impact that Dark Souls did, as even those felt like challenges I had already overcome before. I'm not going to try to define the Souls-like label in what games should or shouldn't fit into it, only Iron Pineapple can do that, but I will say I think part of why the label has stretched so much further than it arguably should is due to games sharing a similar design philosophy regardless of whether or not they have similarities in gameplay. Recently, I watched a video called There Will Never Be Another Rain World by UK that helped put some of this into perspective for me. In it, he discusses how unique Rain World is, and that it being so unlike anything else he's ever played makes it a hard game to define and categorize. However, throughout the video, he does note some games that share similarities and feel like they operate on a similar frequency. They don't play similarly, but there is an essence to them that feels the same. And hearing him talk about this made me realize that I think of a handful of games, pretty much all of which are some of my favorites, as having the same frequency as Dark Souls. They're titles that focus on player-directed gameplay, that aren't afraid to let people feel stuck or lost, that challenge one's perception of what a game should or shouldn't do, that trusts folks to figure things out on their own. And it's these titles that share a similar design philosophy but apply it to different types of games that actually get me to feel the same way I did when playing Dark Souls. Funnily enough, in that video, UK actually makes a joke about how Rain World being labeled as a Souls-like seems off, and okay, hear me out. Rain World is pretty much the game people describe Dark Souls to be. It is brutally difficult, at times seeming almost impossible. It provides little explicit direction to the player, with most of the information it does give out being vague and hard to decipher, and it takes a tremendous amount of observation and patience in order to learn the systems of the game well enough to overcome it. You will fail more times than you can count, but all of that makes getting through this world that does not care about you feel incredible. Truthfully, when it comes to that sense of overcoming immeasurable odds and sifting through obscurity, it is more Dark Souls than Dark Souls. In it, you aren't shit, but with enough time, you might be. Through an entire different form of gameplay, it led me to that same sense of powerlessness that made Dark Souls such a novel experience. Almost every area gave me the same amount of anxiety that Blighttown did in terms of not knowing if I'd ever be able to get through it, and they also brought me to the same level of joy when I came across a shelter or some form of clear progression. The tension that comes from everything you do is immense, be it journeying far away from a shelter and not knowing if you will get back to a new one before the rain comes, or finding yourself stuck between a lizard and a vulture who both want to devour you, and that tension always resolves in big emotions, whether that be frustration or relief. Regardless of which one it is, both build off each other to create even bigger emotional resolutions, which makes reaching the end feel so triumphant. Another game that cultivates this same feeling is Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. It often gets labeled as being purely a rage game, but I think it differs from most other rage games in that its ultimate goal is not to make you rage, but instead it wants to make you sit with it and learn it. And the game can be learned. There's really not anything in it that's unfair, it's just awkward. The controls are simple to understand but unwieldy to maneuver, making it so even though you'll generally understand what you need to do, you won't quite have the touch to actually be able to do it. Hard-earned progress will be lost regularly, and unlike both Dark Souls and Rain World, there aren't any true checkpoints to protect your progress. You do reach spots that are relatively safe, but even until the very end, there is always a risk of messing up and finding yourself all the way back at the bottom. What makes Getting Over It work is that you eventually do figure out the right touch, and it gets to the point where after overcoming an obstacle once or twice, you'll have a pretty good sense of how to do it every time. This makes it so the despair that comes from losing everything is immediately washed away by the joy of getting back to where you were in a fraction of the time. It's the run back after dying where the enemies no longer feel as fearsome, where you even feel comfortable ducking and weaving around them because you know the path well enough to get where you need to go without being accosted.
That's not to say it becomes mindless though.
The push and pull between failure and mastery always keeps you alert and engaged. One of the major themes of Getting Over It is the disposability of games. With many titles, the focus is always to get to the end and move on to the next one, but it, as well as Dark Souls, does a lot to make you stick around for a long time. They don't want you to get through an area without you having to properly consider it. And they also do a lot to make you actively want to come back for victory laps after you figured things out. The effort and pain it takes to clear the mountain just one time makes conquering it again and again feel like a form of retribution, and it's why so many people keep coming back to it. Now, this frequency that Dark Souls and Rain World and Getting Over It share isn't exclusive to games that require fast reaction times or dexterity. There's all sorts of ways to create this sense. For instance, consider Lisa the Painful. It's a turn-based RPG that does feature some button inputs, but pulling those off is far less important than adapting to the situations you're put in and making choices about what to do and what to use to get past any encounter. Like Dark Souls, it is a game that does not fear losing players. Its themes are heavy and its core gameplay loop is unforgiving. Honestly, where even Dark Souls makes resting at a bonfire a place for safety, Lisa doesn't care. Doing so risks being robbed, kidnapped, poisoned, and all sorts of other things. But the reality is, it is a risk that will need to be taken, otherwise you will never be able to progress. The brutal nature of the gameplay feeds perfectly into the narrative and setting, creating a synergy between the three that makes the game feel so immersive. Admittedly, due to the nature of its narrative, overcoming individual challenges as well as the game as a whole doesn't bring the exact same kind of relief as it does in Dark Souls or the other titles I've mentioned, but it certainly does bring some, and that is worth holding on to. What's more important though is the connection it creates between the player and the world they are playing in. Like Lordran, it is one that should never be taken lightly, and even though it will try to get you to put your guard down, doing so will come at your own peril. Now, so far it might sound like this frequency is just about difficulty, and I don't know, that certainly is part of it, but it has less to do with them being difficult games and more to do with how difficulty is used. Sometimes, like with the titles I've already mentioned, it is central to every aspect of it, and other times it is applied far more sparingly. But either way, its aim is to create a certain feeling that leaves you constantly wondering what you need to do and if you have the capacity to even do it. What I'm trying to say is that while Outer Wilds may seem about as far from Dark Souls as you can really get, the way it embraces failure and allows players to get lost makes it feel like it's cut from the same cloth. On the whole, it's not a super difficult game. There certainly are some puzzles that take a lot of thought and that you may be stuck on for a while, but the answers are always out there. It is just about having the patience to find them and taking the time to consider what you know in order to connect things together. Observation is vital to success in Outer Wilds, and it actively punishes hastiness and inattention. However, the game does a few things that make it hard to always be thorough. For starters, the responsibility of deciding what to do and where to go is entirely on the player. There aren't waypoints or clear objectives, so it isn't always obvious what should come next. This can lead to a lot of confusion and worrying that you're on the wrong track. Also, due to the fact that in it you're stuck in a time loop, there are occasions where it's hard not to rush things. When that timer gets close to running out, panic sets in, and so does a bit of sloppiness. These failures are always short-lived, as you have the opportunity to go back, but they do add a layer of challenge to your exploration that creates a nice bit of tension. So in those instances where you do figure something big out just in the nick of time, that relief feels as good as beating a boss. While part of what makes overcoming a challenge in Dark Souls feel satisfying is the execution, a large part also comes from the process of discovery. This may be in the form of openings in which to attack bosses during, or weapons that are better suited for your playstyle, or items and materials that will make you stronger, or things you can engage with that shift the nature of a fight. It's not just about a release of tension, it's also about learning. And this kind of learning is really what Outer Wilds is all about. As the only true barrier for progression is your own knowledge, overcoming these struggles feels personally connected to you. It feels less about how good you are at a video game and more about your ability to problem solve. And this can be hard at times as you'll feel like an idiot, but when things click, there is nothing better. A similar sort of interplay between difficulty and discovery can also be seen with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. After years and years of Zelda losing a bit of its edge in terms of difficulty, Breath of the Wild finally shifted things back to the series' less forgiving roots that acted as a source of inspiration for Dark Souls itself. Honestly, I always felt like Dark Souls was what the Zelda franchise would have looked like had they kept making games in the same vein as Zelda 2 instead of A Link to the Past. Now, I don't think Breath of the Wild is nearly as steeped in difficulty as old school Zelda or Dark Souls, but does still use it to drive player behavior. The first 10 or so hours feel truly perilous. Resources are in short supply, enemies pose a significant threat, and depending on where you choose to go, it can be extremely easy to get in over your head. The very real dangers that the world of Hyrule provides pushes you to be creative with every encounter you come across and always in search of ways to get stronger, which pretty much everything you can do in the game, from completing shrines to collecting Korok seeds to gathering bugs, is in service of. Once you stock up on an arsenal of strong weapons, increase your heart capacity a fair bit, and earn some of the abilities of the champions, the threat Hyrule and Ganon poses is diminished. But by that point, you're already accustomed to the gameplay loop and happy to do more of it. At its core, Breath of the Wild is a game about exploration, and while many titles try to push players to explore by making things feel as smooth as possible, it uses tension to drive its players. In the same way that I explored every inch of Lordran in the hopes of finding something to give me a leg up, in those early hours, I did the exact same thing in Hyrule. Another example of this can be seen with Tunic. It certainly could be argued that as the combat is based around dodge rolls, lock-ons, and a death mechanic that encourages you to go back to the spot you died to collect your stuff, it falls into the camp of Souls-likes. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. The gameplay isn't that far off, but honestly, the part of it that reminded me of Dark Souls the most had little to do with the combat and everything to do with the game that is lurking beneath the surface of Tunic. I will be keeping things as vague as possible as to not spoil the bits of the title that matter most, but throughout the game you come across many mysteries and various things that are clearly important, but you don't have an understanding of how to engage with them. As you progress though, you will collect pages of the game's instruction book, which give practical tips as well as the information needed to answer many questions about the world. What's great is that this can all mostly be ignored. You can play it like a bog standard Souls-like, but there is so much more to the game for those who want to dive deeper. In the same way that Dark Souls had me reconsidering every gaming rule, Tunic hid so many secrets in places I would have never thought to look. And what's most amazing are the ways it encourages players to start looking for them. Throughout the game, the bosses all pose a decent enough challenge, but once you get to the final one, there is a massive spike in difficulty. And that spike was so huge that despite trying over and over again, I couldn't make any significant progress. The boss is definitely beatable, but I just couldn't get past it. However, a page I found in the instruction book insinuated that there might be a different way to beat the game. So as I wasn't in the mood for grinding against one boss for a few hours, I decided to follow that other path. And this turned a world that I had thought I had finished exploring into one with so many new things to discover. This path basked in the obscure, and making sense of what almost felt like a new game was exhilarating. Now with this frequency, I don't think it's just about difficulty being used as a tool to create a certain mood. It's also about failure being used to establish one. And I know that we are approaching big stretch territory here, so please bear with me, but I think Disco Elysium also feels like Dark Souls. In most ways, it's a game about learning from and embracing failure. It's it's designed in a way where key progression is tied behind stat checks, and due to how attributes are doled out, you won't be able to overcome most of them, meaning you will often have to make concessions and do things you don't feel comfortable doing. Failure in Dark Souls generally means trying again, but in Disco Elysium that isn't an option. Unless you save scum, but frankly, based on how unlikely it is to succeed at certain checks, doing so would be a miserable way to play. Here, you actually have to sit in failure and adapt to it, which is pretty great, as failing in Disco Elysium oftentimes is as, if not more, interesting than succeeding. This type of failure differs from what is found in Dark Souls in other ways as well. Instead of being skill-based, it comes down to choices you make and the luck you have when making them. But both types had the same effect of putting me into a desperate mindset where I always felt a bit on the brink of disaster, leading to me taking risks I probably shouldn't have taken in the hopes it would pay off, and reveling in glory the few times it did. While we're on stretches, let's just keep going and talk about Minecraft. Now, I think it's worth noting that there was a pretty drastic difference between Minecraft now and Minecraft when I first played it. Back in the beta days, so much less was known about it, and it didn't have any of the quality of life features it does now. There weren't in-game crafting guides, there wasn't instruction in any form of what to do or where to go, there weren't even beds. It really just dropped you in and let you go. And honestly, that first play session is one I will never forget. I had seen a short video about the game, so I knew a couple things about how the crafting worked, and for those first few minutes, I was in awe that I could interact with everything I came across. It was like playing with Legos that reacted to whatever I did. The fact that nothing seemed off limits felt so special, and I felt a strange power over everything around me. And then the sun started to set, and the world that had seemed so full of possibilities suddenly became one with dangers everywhere. Aside from the terrain just being far more treacherous in the dark, the threat of zombies and spiders and creepers made everything all the more terrifying, and the risk of losing everything I had gathered felt so high. Torches helped some, but the only way to really be protected was by making a base of some sort. Once I did that though, I was just standing in a room with one torch and nothing to do. Nothing to do but dig. And so I dug, and found all sorts of new things to discover. The night and day cycle of Minecraft so naturally pushes players into the gameplay loop of exploring outside during the day and in the mines at night, and this is pretty astonishing given the scope of the game. At least back then, the only way to learn what the game wanted from you was by trying things.
Oftentimes those things wouldn't work, but like in Dark Souls, this low information approach made experimentation a must, and whenever I did figure something out for myself, it felt incredible. Of course, the downside to this kind of design is that it makes checking a wiki that much more tempting, but I still think there's a lot of value in giving players a chance to do things for themselves.
Now, a thing worth noting here is that I actually played Minecraft well before I played Dark Souls. So this Dark Soulsian frequency that I've been talking about this whole time didn't even start with Dark Souls. Honestly, it didn't even start with Minecraft, as I felt it with Shadow of the Colossus a few years prior. I had never played anything like it before. Its use of space and slowness caught me so off guard and made the actual fights with each Colossus feel incredibly impactful. I'm pretty convinced that had I only heard about the gameplay loop secondhand, I would have assumed the game would be extremely boring, but that was far from what I felt when playing it. Every moment, whether it was riding through the desolate ruins of this lost kingdom or encountering a hulking colossus, felt like it mattered. And unlike the action games I had grown accustomed to, the answer for defeating the colossi wasn't by constantly attacking to do as much damage as possible in between dodging attacks. It was by learning their patterns and how they exist within the world, and using that information to find out how to exploit them to get to their weak point. They seemed impossible at first, and so it made me feel like a genius for solving how to defeat each of them.
While the bosses in Dark Souls aren't as puzzle-based, they did feel similarly impenetrable. I couldn't just spam through them, I had to rely on patience and observation to have a chance of overcoming them.
I'd imagine some of you probably think it's weird that I'm comparing games I played before Dark Souls to Dark Souls instead of the other way around, and I'd agree, it is weird. Truthfully, it'd make more sense if this video were titled Games That Feel Like Shadow of the Colossus That Aren't Really Like Shadow of the Colossus. But A, that isn't nearly as snappy of a title, and B, I didn't look at games in the same way I do now back when I first played it. It's hard to fully articulate, but as my tastes and opinions have changed over the years, so has the way I look at titles I played in the past. Back then, I was less knowledgeable about games and didn't spend a ton of time trying to decode what it was exactly that I liked about them. But Dark Souls came at a time where I was becoming more curious, and it was such an extreme example of this kind of design philosophy that it helped me form a new understanding of my taste. It acted as a sort of confirmation. As a friend of mine put it when I was trying to explain this idea to him to see if I was making any sense, it gave a name to a feeling. And of course, at this point, it's been over a decade since I first played any of these three games, and time has a way of stirring memories and feelings together and shaping them into a form that differs from the reality of it. So Dark Souls is the cipher now. With all of the games I've talked about here, I've mostly just focused on the common design philosophy that I think exists to some extent in each of them, but I do think there is another similarity that is found in pretty much all of these games that is worth noting, which is that they largely take place in worlds that feel like they are past or near their end. In them, you're exploring ruins, learning of civilizations long past, and awaking ancient powers best left alone. In places that are still inhabited, there is unrest and fear. Things could collapse at any moment. This kind of setting is not unique to Dark Souls. It was popular long before it ever came out, and for good reason, as settings like this are so rife with opportunity. These types of worlds practically force you to deeply consider them. You engage both with how things were and how things are, giving multiple ways to understand the place you're exploring. And I think being pushed to reflect like this makes it easier to be in the moment, to not take these places for granted, to slow down a bit and appreciate the beauty in what is left. And this reflective mindset pairs well with the higher intensity gameplay that exists within all of these titles, as it provides a chance to find some relief between the more brutal moments while still feeling in line with the themes the games put forward. Now, what makes these titles stick out amongst all the other games that are player directed, use difficulty in ways that lead to interesting and rewarding gameplay, and have broken worlds to explore, is that, for me at least, they provided an experience within their respective genre that truly felt unique. In the same way Dark Souls changed the way I thought about third-person action games, Breath of the Wild changed how I thought about open worlds, Lisa changed how I thought about turn-based RPGs, and Outer Wilds changed how I thought about puzzle games. Some pretty much invented new genres, others redefined them, and they all left me feeling like I had learned something new, experienced something fresh that was onto something, that hopefully would lead to the next generation of games taking the best ideas from these to create something else that felt like it was in a league of its own. These are all games that have pushed the industry forward, whether that be through selling incredibly well and driving up demand for titles in a similar vein, or being adored by game designers who want players to feel the same sense of awe from whatever they make. And I do want to say, I recognize that just because I see the parts I love most about Dark Souls in all of these games doesn't mean anyone else will. Honestly, something I've been wondering about through the process of making this video is, do I like all these games so much because they are similar, or do I find them to be similar because I like them? Because I need to find a pattern within the things I care about most so that I can more easily identify my taste and hopefully find more that fits within it. I think the answer is somewhere in the between. Like, whether or not Dark Souls acted as any sort of inspiration for these games, they do all share aspects of the same design philosophy, one that emphasizes player control and agency, leading to every accomplishment feeling earned instead of progression just being given. But also, I am sure because I am looking for these connections, it is much easier for me to see them. You can find similarities in pretty much anything if you try hard enough. I imagine the way people respond to this video will make it clear where along this spectrum I really fall. I'd be willing to bet though that I'm not fully alone on this. As I mentioned at the start, Dark Souls has long been a game at the tip of anyone who talks about games' tongue. It is a reference point that gets referenced maybe too often. And unlike people who have only seen Boss Baby feeling like whatever movie they see next has Boss Baby vibes, most of the folks who endlessly find connections between Dark Souls and everything else have played tons of games before and after it. It isn't that it's the only thing they know, it's that it shook up everything they knew, and this opened their eyes to what they truly love about games. Ultimately, calling any of these titles a Souls-like would be a stretch at best and feel like an outright lie at worst. If what matters most to you about Dark Souls is tough but fair combat, then yeah, of course the likes of Lies of P, Ashen, and Hollow Knight will feel like better comparisons. However, I do think that the people who loved finding out that you can drop on top of the Taurus Demon for a massive amount of damage, that the elevator in the Undead Parish leads back to Firelink Shrine, that there is more than one path in and out of Blight Town, that massive secrets may be hiding behind a simple wall, are the same type who would love figuring out what the symbols that come up when resting in a shelter mean in Rain World, who would love mastering the controls of getting over it to the point where moving through it feels routine, and who would love exploring places in Outer Wilds one would normally assume they wouldn't be able to find the answers that matter most. I think the majority of people who are chasing the novel experience of Dark Souls will never find it in stuff that is notably derivative of it, but clearly that feeling is out there. We just have to keep looking in places that might not seem to have it. A lot about games can be learned from looking into their design philosophies, and it's especially great when getting to hear about what was behind a decision expressly from the developers. One of the coolest resources for learning about the development of specific games is Lost in Cult's Design Works series, and in what has to be the most on-brand sponsorship of all time, they reached out to me to help promote their latest book, Outer Wilds Design Works. If you've never seen a Design Works book before, they are a beautiful combination of art and interviews and information about whatever game is being covered, and it's just the ultimate celebration of special games. So you can only imagine how excited I was to hear that they were doing this for my favorite game. It's made in official collaboration with the developers of Outer Wilds, Mobius Digital, so it includes never before seen artwork and interviews with many people on the dev team, including the creative director Alex Beecham, the writer Kelsey Beecham, and the composer whose work has undoubtedly made many of you in this audience cry at least once, Andrew Prallo. Now, for those of you who want all the bells and whistles, there is also a deluxe edition of the book, which includes a 3D papercraft model of the game's spaceship, posters of the various planets, projection stones that apparently will reveal secrets within the book, and a bunch of other really neat stuff. This is the book in its ultimate form and will only be available during the pre-order campaign, which will end on December 2nd. If you use the link in the description and enter Rasputin when checking out, you can get 5% off your order. Outer Wilds is a game that you can really only play through once, yet it is so special that pretty much everyone who plays it wants to keep reliving it in one way or another, and this book is a pretty great way to do that. So definitely check it out. Huge thanks to Lost in Cult for sponsoring this video. For all of you still here, I hope you're doing well. As always, thank you to my patrons for making this channel possible. I hope you have a great day and or night, and I'll see you in the next one.